Charles surrendered to the Scots and was handed to Parliament in January 1647. In March, Frederick Henry died and William II became Prince of Orange. In June, Charles was taken into the custody of the army, and on Boxing Day he signed a secret treaty with the Scottish Engagers. In May 1648, the Second Civil War broke out. In June, a small fleet defects to the Royalists in Holland, and the States General narrowly approved the Peace of Munster. Charles II borrows 30,000 francs and sends arms to Hamilton. He then recruits 400 troops and charters ships for England. After sailing up the coast for a week or two with his ill-disciplined fleet, he is back in The Hague when news arrives about Hamilton's army. It has been annihilated by Cromwell. Scotland. In 1559, French King Henry II died and his sickly son Francis handed power to the Duke of Guise. Mary Stuart was Queen of France and her mother Mary Guise Regent of Scotland. In 1559, the Lords of Congregation seized Edinburgh, and the pro-Spanish, fanatically Catholic Guise family sent troops to Scotland with the ultimate aim of Spain, France and Scotland removing Elizabeth I. English troops ejected the French and Mary Guise died of dropsy. This left a power vacuum and enabled fanatical Calvinism to strike deep roots. Scotland was 200 years behind Europe and, unlike the Dutch, lacked large urban centres and a sophisticated middle class. Fanatical Calvinism was unmoderated. Erasmian Protestantism was anathema to the Scots. When humanist Michael Servetus, discoverer of the pulmonary system, escaped from the Inquisition to Geneva, Calvin had him burned alive. This was the fanatical foundation of Scotland until the Enlightenment with the 1707 Act of Union. Hamilton was a royalist lowlander who had described Presbyterianism as no religion for a gentleman and favoured moderation. Argyll was a Highlander whose Calvinism was plastered over savage clan tribalism. After defeat at Preston, the Engagers were routed by the Whigamore raid led by Kirk fanatics. Preston also sealed the fate of Charles I. In December, the army remove all opposition from Parliament, Pride's Purge, and in January put Charles on trial. The Dutch send representatives who plea for clemency, and the next day the king is executed. In February, the Covenanter Parliament of Scotland proclaimed Charles II king, and the Marquis of Ormond, having concluded a treaty with the Catholic Confederation, invites Charles to Ireland. In 1542, Henry VIII upgraded Ireland from a lordship to a kingdom. In the first Irish Parliament to include Gaelic chieftains and Hiberno-Norman aristocracy, he was proclaimed king. The Elizabethan tax crisis united the Gaelic and Old English Catholics against the Crown, and decades of disenfranchisement triggered the 1641 rebellion, forcing Charles to recall Parliament and precipitating the English Civil War. The Catholic Confederation then allied with the Royalists in exchange for a pardon, religious toleration and autonomy. The Second Ormond Peace places Catholic forces under royal command, and Charles II is invited to take charge. In April, envoys from the Kirk arrive with a covenant to sign. In May, Montrose, who fainted upon hearing of Charles's execution, urges Charles II to accept the Ireland plan, and his followers murder an English ambassador in The Hague. In June, Charles II heads for Ireland. He sojourns in France and is in Jersey when he learns of Cromwell's total victory. Ormond is routed at Rothmeans and his line of fortified towns collapse, beginning with Drogheda. Cromwell was organised and his troops filled with zeal to avenge well-publicised atrocities against Protestants. In January 1650, Charles finally accepts the Scottish option, and the very next day, in an amazing betrayal of a loyal supporter, asks Montrose to resume a campaign against the Kirk, which automatically fails when news of the King's agreement is made public. Montrose is hanged and quartered. In May 1650, Charles II signs the Covenant, and in June sails to Scotland, William II having cleared his considerable debts. He has to dismiss his Presbyterian councillors, who are far too moderate for the Scots, and he obviously discards his loyal Episcopalian retinue. The English spy stresses the importance of quickly defeating the Scots. Cromwell, on returning from Ireland, heads to Scotland and wins his greatest victory at Dunbar. William II had two phases, dissolute and dedicated. He had two goals: restoring the Stuarts and resuming the war to divide Spanish Flanders with France. In February 1649, he had treasonously written to Mazarin asking for military assistance to crush the States of Holland, which would enable war to be declared on England's Commonwealth. In August 1650, he sent 10,000 troops to besiege Amsterdam and arrested 8 officials. The States of Holland plead for compromise, with public opinion overwhelmingly on their side. William dies in November 1650 from smallpox, and by default Holland dominates the Republic.